Hello, Python coders. So in today's video, I want to talk about the concepts of error handling and logging in Python. And then I'm going to show you some simple examples, and then I'll show you a couple more that are a little bit more complex. Okay? So why do we do error handling in the first place? Well, the problem is that we can't always go under the assumption that what we are going to do is going to work perfectly. And we do have a little bit more control, well, a lot more control over our own code, but a lot of times we are not just dealing with our own code. We are dealing with things that are located in what we call the outside world, something that is outside of your program. Now, in my particular case, I interface with my MySQL server all the time. But what happens if something goes wrong with that MySQL server? And I use this in Qt applications quite a bit because I read and write to various databases. All right, so first let's talk about basic error handling and what we're going to do in Python to accomplish that. Let's create ourselves a simple function called divide numbers, spelling counts. Let's see, numbers. And what we're going to do is we're going to take in a number 1 and a number 2. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say result equals number 1, and I'm going to divide it by number 2. And then I'm going to print the result. And then also I can return the result. All right, and then from here I can actually call that result. So I can say result equals divide numbers, and I'm going to pass it 20 and 10. All right, so when I run this, I shouldn't really have any trouble simply because this division is fully possible. So we get 2. Now, in doing mathematical operations, addition is pretty simple. Subtraction is very simple. Multiplication is very simple. However, what is the common problem when we try to do division? Well, the common problem that we're going to run into is, what if we try to divide by 0? And as we all know, we can't divide by 0. So if I change this and I pass in my second number as a 0, what's actually going to happen? Make this a little bit bigger. There we go. If I try to run this, you'll see that it explodes simply because I'm trying to do a division by 0. And my exit code actually gets set to 1. I don't want this to blow up if I attempt to divide by 0. I just want to send a message, and I'm going to set my result to 0. So how I'm going to accomplish that is by using a try and except block in Python. So I'm going to say try, and anything that I put under that except block or that try block is going to try and run. Now I need to handle the exceptions. In other words, I'm working under the assumption that things are going to go okay. But if something does go wrong, this is what I want you to do. So I'm going to say except, and the exception that I want to catch is the 0 division error, which is actually built into Python. So I can say 0 division error. What am I going to do? I'm going to print a message that says cannot divide by 0. I'll even spell it out. And then I'm going to return 0 as the result. So now in this particular case, this is not going to explode. So if I run this again, you'll see that my exit code is now 0. It's not 1. And all that happened was I printed the message that says cannot divide by 0. Now, this type of exception handling you're going to see all throughout Python examples. And in dealing with the outside world, if you have a Python library that you are using to communicate with something, let's say a database server, you're bringing in data from a web service, there's all kinds of different scenarios, but anything that you're dealing with the outside world and you have a Python library for it, they always have ways that you can catch exceptions. And in my case, with MySQL server, it's no different. I can capture many types of errors in working with that server. Okay, so this is basic error handling, but what about logging? What if I want to combine the two? So when I capture an error message, I also want to write that into a log file. So what I've got here is a simple function that is going to set up some logging for me. Now, in the description of the video, I'm going to post a link, and I can show it to you now, actually. This is the Python Cookbook for logging. Logging is a huge subject in Python. I'm just going to show you some simple scenarios here, but you can do quite a bit with logging. What we're going to do with logging is we're going to log to two separate log files, a main logging file and also an error logging file, which is going to capture errors and critical errors. But you can log to many different destinations. So I can log to standard error, standard output. I can send that to a logging server. I can write it to a log file. I can put it to the console, any type of thing like that. Let's keep things simple for today. And let's take a look at how we're going to set up our logging. First thing I'm going to set up is, what do I want the log entries to look like? So I'm going to set up this entry format, which is part of the logging module. By the way, you do have to import logging if you want to use logging. So I'm going to say logging.formatter. In other words, these are the format that the entries into my log files are going to look like. So I'm going to log the type. Is it a debug, an information, a warning, a critical? I'm going to log a timestamp because I want to know what date and time this happened on. The entry is going to be the actual message itself. Module is going to be, okay, where did this message come from? The function inside that module, and then the line number. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up where are my two log files going to be. In this particular case, I have a main log file, which is more like a flight recorder, really. And all my messages go in there. And then I have a separate one, which is going to be for errors and above. So anything that is an error or a critical message is going to go in here. I'm going to create myself a custom logger. I'm going to tell that custom logger's level that's going to be debug. So anything that is debug and below is going to go to that custom logger. Then I'm going to set up two handling objects, and they're going to be file handlers. And the reason I need to create two file handlers is I'm going to write these to two different log files. If I wanted to write these to stream files, I can say stream handler. And then I'm going to pass in those two log file names that we created up here. My information handler, I'm going to set its level to information. So anything information and above. And then my error handler, I'm going to set the level to error, which is error and above. So that this should capture error messages and also critical messages. For my information handler, I'm going to set the formatter to my entry format. For my error handler, I'm going to set the formatter to my entry format. So both of my log files should have the exact same layout to them. My custom logger, I'm going to add those two handlers to my custom logger, and then I'm going to return the custom logger object itself. So down here to test this, I've got my custom logger's been created. Then I'm going to send it some messages. So I'm going to send it an information, an error, a critical, and also a debug. So let's go ahead and run this. And I've got two log files under my logs folder called error log and just a regular log. If I take a look at the regular log, you'll see I have some extra messages in here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to delete these and we'll run it again. All right, two fresh log files. So in my log file here, my main log file, you'll see I have my information message, and that's the type, the timestamp, the date and time, the entry, which is my test, information message, the module, and the function. And in this particular case, it's coming from main. In my error log, I'm only going to see the error and the critical. So what I do is I use this log file, this main log file, as sort of a flight recorder. And I can also log just my information messages in here. The error log I use just for critical and error messages. Okay. Now then, let's take a look at a more complicated example where what we are trying to do here, this is a Qt-based application, and what we are going to do is we are going to write data to my MySQL database. So I have a persons table here that has an ID field and a full name field. If I refresh this, currently it's empty. If I go into add edit person here and I run this, you'll see I can give it a full name. And when I hit submit or hit enter, you'll see that new person Jason Smith added. And if I look at my persons database table, you'll see that Jason Smith is now written there. Now this is all fine and dandy, but what if it goes horribly wrong? That's where error and logging come in. So let's walk through this case scenario. I've already built, by the time we get here, I've already built my SQL query for my insert, and I also have my list of values. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I need to create a cursor. So when I try to create the cursor based on my database connection object, I'm going to wrap that in a try and except block. If I run into an error creating that cursor, what I want to do is I want to log that as a critical error into my logger. And I also want to log an error message that says error occurred establishing cursor. See previous messages for details. And then also I'm going to send a message onto my window itself, which is right here. I want to put an error message there that says error occurred in database, see log for details. All right, so let's say we get past this point. Now we're going to try and actually execute that cursor, passing it the SQL query and the values. Again, I'm going to capture some errors. And in this particular case, I'm capturing two errors. One is, what if the person already exists in that database? So I'm going to capture a specific error number, which is 1062. And this 1062 means you're trying to write a duplicate record. I don't necessarily need to log that this happened, although I could, but really I just need to send a message to whoever is using the application that this person already exists in the database. Then I'm going to try and close the cursor. If the cursor doesn't close for some odd reason, I'm just going to pass that by. Else, if I run into any other error, I'm going to put a custom error message in the log that says error occurred, writing record, see previous messages for details, and the critical message is going to come from the error. So in a case like this, what we're trying to do is handle situations where, let's say we lose connectivity to the database server. All right, so I'm going to put a breakpoint right here, and we're going to put this into debug. All right, now we have established a connection to the database server. However, we can't always assume that that connection is going to stay active. If we have a network error and we lose the connection, or the MySQL or whatever database box we're connected to happens to perish for whatever reason, we need to be able to capture that. So I'm going to try to add Jason Smith again. I'm going to hit submit. We're going to hit this line. Now, I've already established my cursor. I got past that point, but let's simulate the MySQL server disappearing. So I'm going to hit stop server. Server is stopped. I don't have any messages right now, but when I try to execute this cursor, it's going to fail. And it does. Right there. And you'll see the error is actually right here, which is lost connection to MySQL server during query. So now we need to log that. It's going to bypass this first error message, and it's going to log the critical error. Then it's going to log my custom message, and then it's going to put the message in the actual window itself, which is right here. And then we return. Now if we go back and look at the window, you'll see that error occurred in database, see log for details. I can close this. Okay, closes normally, nothing exploded. But if I take a look at my error log, you'll see right here, lost connection to MySQL server during query. Module was add edit person, and the function was write record on line 143. If I go back and look at here, and why did it close it? Yeah, they really do need to fix that bug. Line 143. Yep. Or was it should have been line 31. Okay, so anyway, it logged it right there. So I know that that was part of this block of code right here. And let's see, is there anything else I need to say about that? Nope, I've got my custom message there, and then I also put up a custom error in the window. The main point of all this is, even though I'm kind of working under the assumption that this is going to work, I have my exception blocks ready in case it doesn't. So in the case of the person already exists, and I can show that to you right now, I'll just run it. Oh, yes, I actually do need to start my MySQL server. Start server. There we go. All right, so I can add Jason Smith. You'll see new person, Jason Smith added. If I look at the persons table, you'll see there's Jason Smith. Now if I try to add him again, you'll see that it tells me person already exists. And that's because it caught right here. So I tried to add a duplicate record. It comes back and says, nope, that's a duplicate, and I can say that the person already exists. Now if I change this, you'll see I can add him in just fine because he's not in the table already. So anyway, that's kind of the gist of it. I want to be able to capture when these errors occur. And like I said, this is incredibly important when you are dealing with outside resources, such as a database server, a web service server, if you're trying to consume a web service. You need to, you can go under the assumption that things are going to work, but if it doesn't, you have to understand you need to handle those, or your program is just going to end. It's going to explode. Not very good. Also, you may ask yourself, if you're already familiar with some of these concepts, why am I wrapping each and every step in a try and accept block? Well, the reason that I'm doing that is because I want to log custom messages every time something happens. So then I can look at the message that got logged in the log and I can say, oh, the error occurred establishing the cursor, or the error occurred writing the record. So that's why I have each one of these steps wrapped in its own try and accept block. I could technically create the cursor, write the record, and throw that into one try and accept block. But I don't actually think that's a good practice in this case. I like to keep the two things as fairly separate as I possibly can. And if I try to close the cursor here, then if it for some reason I lost connection after I wrote the record, I don't really care. I just tell it to go ahead and pass that by. Now, another thing that you need to consider when you're dealing with a lot of logs like this, you'll see that there's some entries in here. But what happens if, and see, I'm creating a new log file every day. So right now, this is the 5th of February. On the 6th of February, it would create a new log file. The problem with that is, if I run this application every day for hundreds of days, I'm going to have hundreds of log files stuck in this logs folder. So what you may want to do is, when you first launch your application, you may want to have a function created that goes through and loops and removes the oldest log files. Maybe you want to keep 14 days in the local folder. So you could write a function that goes out there and removes the oldest ones so that you're only keeping about 14 days. You can keep a month, whatever. I've seen situations where people will go out there and they will zip the files up and they'll actually move them to a network location where they can keep a lot more of that data. There's a lot of white space in these logs because they're text files. So if you zip them up, you're going to save a lot of space. The other thing you could do is set up a centralized logging server, and then you could have all the logging go into there. In the description of the video, I'm not only going to include a link to this cookbook, but I'm going to include a link to a publication called Powerful Python that has a chapter dedicated to just logging. And I found this extremely helpful when I was first setting up logging in Python, especially something a little bit more sophisticated than just basic logging. All right. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And as always, happy coding.